Oh, well, I had never been so optimistic in my life for the party. In 1987, just before the election was called, we, for the first time, were in two or three polls, we were running first in the country, and that had never happened before. So we started the campaign in a very upbeat mood. For the first time, I consciously thought to myself, as did our campaign team, that we could actually win. And that was new. As you say, it was my fourth campaign as leader, and we'd started out from quite a low base, and the polls were really nice in 1987. Not quite as good when the election was called, but I was in the high emotionally, believed in our campaign, and thought things could go well. Well, it's always hard to sort out why people support a party and a leader at a given time, especially in an election. And I said then, and I repeat now, I was given voice to what a social democratic program of fairness and job creation, in the particular instance of the trade deal where I thought we were going to lose a lot of sovereignty as a nation. Had been talking about those themes before the election was called, and tried to address them in maybe plain language, in everyday Canadian, or a phrase I used to use, ordinary Canadian kind of language. Tried to talk substance, but not in an academic or pretentious kind of way. And I think Canadians were open very much to a progressive agenda for the country then, and as I believe they are as we're doing this interview, as a matter of fact. And I was the voice of the NDP that talked about those values, and I would be doing sheer speculation if I gave any explanation more than what I've just attempted to do. No, it was not a strategic problem. I mean, it was seen to be likely to loom as the most serious issue, but from our point of view, it was that, but it was also part of our whole approach to the future of Canada. So we had the other kinds of items I'm just talking about: cost of living, job creation, housing concerns, were all part of our campaign. We thought the trade deal would be very central and very crucial, but we did not want it to be the only issue. As a Social Democratic Party, we wanted to be clear, well, that trade deal was very important, so were other matters. And that's how we approached the campaign. Oh, absolutely. I mean, going into the debate, I felt good about our positioning, and in the debate itself, anyone as unbiased as I'm not, anyone watching that debate with Mr. Mulroney, Mr. Turner, myself, I would, without trying to sound boastful, think I came out at least as well as anyone else in that debate, and very strong on what turned out to be the issue, which was the trade deal. And speaking as more of a commentator than as a participant now, I think what happened is that Mr. Turner, who began on that issue to be very engaged, up to that point had not been doing well, generally speaking, as leader of the Liberal Party. So the media seized upon this powerful confrontation rhetorically between Mr. Turner and Mr. Mulroney. And as happens in politics, in several elections in Canada, the US, the UK, since 1988, a TV debate clip can be influential in shaping how the media portrays campaigns right after. So although on substance, I think I did well, and people said that. In fact, a public opinion poll right after said that. The dramatic clip that was used over and over was, of course, between Mr. Turner and Mr. Mulroney, and that began to not only shape the debate, but shape it as a contest between Mr. Mulroney and Mr. Turner often. And we saw what could happen, of course, if that turned out to be the case, particularly on a regional basis. If people decided to vote up or down on the trade issue only, then that was going to be highly problematic for us because take the largest province, Ontario, you had a premier already, Mr. Peterson, who was opposed to the trade deal. You had all the elected provincial members of the provincial Liberal Party that were opposed to the trade deal. You had more Liberal seats there already federally than NDP. So if you were going to, as a voter, just decide on the basis of the trade deal, and the Liberals were opposed, suddenly became, in that year, they weren't clearly before opposed to it at all, they were quite ambivalent. Suddenly they became very opposed to it. The people in Ontario were going to vote up or down on that. Then the NDP as a third party could get cut out. And broadly speaking, this is what played out. There was strategic voting for the first time, I think, in modern history at the federal level. So people did, by and large, vote on the basis of the trade deal. That helped us in British Columbia. We got the largest number of seats ever in 1988 in British Columbia, in general in the West, where we were already strong. And it helped the Liberals, where they were already strong. And that meant, very importantly, in the province of Ontario, but also in Atlantic Canada. And it helped Mr. Mulroney right across Canada as the one of the then three parties that supported the deal. So Mr. Mulroney was able to pull in right across the country, all those supporters, and it was a minority, but a strong minority of Canadians, who supported the trade deal. So it became a strategic voting election. The net results were we got the largest number of seats ever in our history, the largest popular vote ever, but I personally was very disappointed because in Quebec, where I had counted on making a breakthrough for the first time federally, anywhere from 6 to 8 seats, we didn't get any seats. Mr. Mulroney capitalized on the fact that most Quebecers liked the trade deal, and we didn't get the breakthrough we liked, and Mr. Mulroney got his majority. That had been the leading exponent of the views against the trade deal in the previous 2 years when it was being discussed. It was certainly emphasized. But what did happen is the media portrayal, especially after the debate, was that it was a contest between Mr. Turner and the Liberals on the one hand and Mr. Mulroney and the Conservatives on the other. That's what they were more interested in reporting. It's hard for me, impossible to be completely objective in this. But I know how strongly I felt against the trade deal at that time in Canadian history. And I know I spoke, and the record will show that in community after community on this issue. But the media, and this isn't a blame game here on my part, this is the way things function. Elections turned out to be personality contests conveyed through the media. And they had decided that by osmosis almost, it was to be a battle between the survival and revival of the Liberal Party in this campaign under Mr. Turner and Mr. Mulroney. And one was on one side and one was on the other. And we were the third party. And so we got caught in that squeeze. Not, in my view, because we decided not to talk about the trade deal. I did talk about the trade deal. Well, when it comes right down to fundamentals where parties are oriented, both the Liberal Party then and the Conservative Party were right of center, ideologically speaking, and I think with sincerity. I'm not indulging in questions of integrity here, but they were in favor of tax breaks for corporations, significant tax breaks. They were in favor of what has emerged since then as a sort of neoliberal model of the economy, with a little dash of nationalism thrown in by Mr. Turner. But the fundamentals of corporate tax policy a tax system in terms of personal income taxes that would disproportionately favor richer Canadians over poorer Canadians. The whole notion that we would have of having a strategy for industrial development that would involve both the public and private sector, they would reject that. So broadly speaking, I meant what I said about Bay Street, Bay-Coma, in the sense of the perspective Brian Mulroney brought to national politics, where his view was if corporations are doing good in Canada, that's how it's what I grew up with in the sense in Oshawa. What's good for General Motors is good for the world. Well, it's not necessarily true if you ignore the well-being or disproportionately don't take into account the well-being of working families. Well, it's in that broadly based set of class politics that still the modern world is functioning under. Mr. Obama classically fought a whole recent campaign in the United States on the benefits going to the top 1% or 10%, while the average Americans were being ignored. We have the same inequality problems today in Canada, but at that time, what I was getting at is set aside the rhetoric of Mr. Mulroney and Mr. Turner on the basic issue of economic benefits. How's the system coming down? Is it benefiting the average family or disproportionately those who are already well off? Mr. Turner and Mr. Mulroney were on the same side, and the NDP, as a Social Democratic Party, was on the other side. Oh, yes, absolutely. For many New Democrats across the country, depending where they were, this was a great victory. It was our largest in history, as I say, both in popular vote and seats. But for me, it was a big defeat, personally, because we had worked very hard in the province of Quebec to get a breakthrough. We had very good candidates. We had reason to believe from our own polling during the campaign that 6 to 8 seats we were leading in right up until the last 10, 12 days. So I was counting on a breakthrough. I was looking forward to leading a caucus that had seats from Quebec, and as a guy whose heart was shaped politically and believing in the centrality of Quebec as part of Canada, I always felt badly that we hadn't had seats and from the province, and worked very hard, as I say, in getting good candidates, putting resources into Quebec. But frankly, the free trade issue killed us. Quebecers were the one region in the country where the population was overwhelmingly on the side of the trade deal. So when they decided to vote up or down on that, and you can be sure Mr. Mulroney and the Conservative campaigners did everything they could to persuade Quebecers to vote up or down on the trade deal, we lost. And for me, to use an overworked phrase, it was heartbreaking. I watched the results coming in with my family and my campaign friends, and I'll always remember the motel room. My initial reaction privately to them right after the results come in was I would be stepping down as leader. I didn't say anything publicly at that time, I'm quite sure about that, but I said that privately because it's to use another old metaphor, the wind was taken out of my sails. And you have to, especially in Canada, federal, state, with so many time zones, you need a lot of psychic energy to lead a party. And I had done this, for 15 years almost, and with that setback, I was just really upset. And although after that I went on, there was a year of open consideration on my part, and did indeed have lots of urging from party people across the country to stay. My heart just wasn't in it, and you have to be, or you're not going to do a good job for the party. So I decided to step down. But it was the Quebec results that really did it. very strong view is there was nothing inevitable about this. There's nothing inevitable about history. There was very successful persuasion on the part of certain right-of-center politicians like Mr. Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and their equivalents who emerged in Canada, plus a global business community that convinced a lot of people, and by the way, some social democratic parties, that markets were to replace almost everything. They wanted to take a mixed economy where there were vibrant and successful public enterprises and destroy them because they thought markets were more efficient, we would all benefit better without regulation, and this has become and is still to a considerable extent the view of so many people. And therefore we led up to a certain economic crash in 2008, by the way, that was a reflection of this belief, and it was a reflection of certain corporate action, but also very much political belief systems. That is to say, a lot of people became convinced that markets should dominate instead of the view that many conservative parties under Mr. Macmillan in the in the United Kingdom, presidents like Dwight Eisenhower in the United States, Robert Stanfield in Canada as conservatives, these people believed in a legitimate role for government. They believed in regulation, particularly in the economy. But the Thatcherites and the Reaganites came along, and in one sense, their fundamental enemy was their own party. They challenged not only social democracy, but they challenged the Bill Davises in Canada, a Premier of Ontario, there's Joe Clark's in Canada, and they brought this dominant market ideology that still prevails, that has led not only to the economic crisis of 2008, but to a terribly pervasive inequality in Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom. The two most unequal democracies in the developed world today are the United Kingdom and the United States. The two countries that came under the sway of this market-only ideology. So it is a challenge. It's a challenge for ordinary people who, by the way, in surveys indicate they would be open and are open to governments to change in order to deal with inequality. But the dominant still parties believe in this, for me, terrible, with its social consequences, neoliberal ideology. So that's why so many people are inclined to say today, globalization is inevitable. This kind of trade arrangement was inevitable. I repeat, there was nothing inevitable about it. It became part of the zeitgeist and thinking that governments you had to get them out of the way. And that's what the trade deal was all about, getting governments out of the way of corporations to be able to move anywhere they want, unrestricted. Bringing some benefits, yes, maybe, but also bringing a lot of harm, maybe an inequality and harm to the environment that require regulation. So this is a long answer to a complicated question. We have a serious ideological challenge in the developed world, in the developed democracy, and that battle is still being waged politically. Oh, an incredible fight. It was a campaign that began in a high level of exuberance on my part. I thought we had a very good program. I thought that the issues did favor us. The polls nationally indicated Canadians were going to be more open to the NDP than ever before, that we in fact could win a national government. And then the issue turned out to be the first strategic voting campaign in modern history, where one issue shaped the campaign, and most Canadians, not all, but most ended up voting up or down on the trade deal. And where we were strong already as a party, i.e. in Western Canada, that tended to favor us. We were seen as the anti-free trade party, for example, in British Columbia. But elsewhere, remember, we were the third party, where it was up or down on the trade issue. It divided more likely between the Liberals and the Conservatives. And that was more a bigger region in Canada than where we were already strong. So that happened, that shifting started to go on partway through the campaign, and I, of course, was aware of that and was apprehensive that the voting would turn out that way. I still hoped that we would get the breakthrough in Quebec, where we had worked so hard, and I think, frankly, where we set a certain foundation that Jack Layton built up on later on. But as it turns out, the Quebecers voted for the trade deal, largely, and Mr. Mulroney, and they won. They cleaned up, and Mr. Mulroney had the opposition votes divided between Mr. Turner and myself, Liberals and New Democrats, and that provided the real opening for him to get all the pro-trade votes, and he formed his government. So I was not happy with the results at all. I went from being very happy at the outset of the campaign. I was generally a happy warrior, but I was not happy, especially when I saw the Quebec results coming in. But I nonetheless managed, a short time after, to take some consolation in the fact that we had the largest number of seats ever in our history elected, with 43 of them, and also the largest popular vote in the history of our party. So they were sources of some satisfaction. Oh, I felt entirely different. In the other campaigns, although I had been a happier warrior, I was under no illusion that we were likely to form a government at the end of the campaigning weeks. In '88, I was under the illusion, but it wasn't an illusion. It was a rational prospect that we might actually form a government. We've been leading in the polls. The party was well respected right across the country. I was enjoying myself, speaking to the issues that I thought were important. So I went into the campaign very happy. The consequences were not as good as I wanted because of what happened in Quebec. We ended up, yes, with the largest number of seats, yes, with the largest popular vote, but it's not what I wanted. I wanted to be able to form a government of Canada, and if not in that election, at least to have been the official opposition with a good representation in the province of Quebec, and that did not happen.